everyone, and welcome back to 18Xonomics, a cardboard reality podcast centered around heavy economic games in the 18XX genre. I'm your host, Joel Mosier. Today I'm joined by Nick, and we discuss why we enjoy heavy economic games in the 18XX genre, the basis of the show. We talk about the math that lies at the base of these games, as well as the strategy and kind of like brain burning behind them. Then we kind of cover how those facets play into our enjoyment of the games, as well as if there's kind of like that one mechanic to rule them all. Nick brings up a really good thought that I hadn't considered previously, which was pretty cool. We wrap up the episode discussing what's been on my mind recently. It's going to be the rolling segment at the end of these episodes, and it's going to cover running a business without advertising, particularly like this podcast, if you know how to kind of run that without running ads for like other businesses to pay us to kind of like sponsor. So without further ado, enjoy the show. Cool. But yeah, so anyways, we're going to talk about some games today. And,
were we on air?
Oh yeah, we're gonna figure that out. I kind of always I want these shows to start off with just like, you know, however it decides to end up being cut in. Like, you know, we've been sitting down here for probably 10, 15 minutes, and at some point, that's just when I'm going to cut it in. And it's going to be interesting.
After I got back from the bathroom pissing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to just like leave that part in while me just sitting here like, dude. I'll put Jeopardy music in the background or something. Yeah. But yeah, so we're going to talk about some heavy economic games and 18XX games today, but particularly why we enjoy them. And like what about them, I kind of really analyze why we think we enjoy heavy economic games and the 18XX genre in general.
So I thought about this because you posed the idea like a couple days ago about, and you sent me the show notes of the document on like what it is you're thinking about talking about. Mm-hmm. And the points you pointed out, I feel like we're coming at it from a different angle, and I couldn't figure out how to word the reason why I actually really enjoy these types of games. And then it finally clicked with me why. So I'll share it later after we go through your points.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was struggling to come up with like particular points. Like honestly, I'm really hoping that you give me an insight that I couldn't put together, because we were talking about before we started that I have a hard time like formulating my sentences sometimes, and like taking what my thought and feeling is and actually like putting it like either on paper or in words or whatever. And so I'm curious if your feeling about it is just gonna like click and be like, no, that's exactly it.
Right.
But yeah, so I came up with a couple of kind of talking points, and we'll kind of break these down, but just the high level points are, is it all about the math? Is it all about the strategy? Or is there something else to them? Because I kind of think that those are the kind of big points with heavy economic games and 18XX games. I mean, obviously economic math, like those two just kind of blend together. Like it's an obvious connection, but is that the reason? And one of the questions, and I mean, you and I have been friends for a long time, so I kind of know your answer, but I am curious to like kind of talk about it in like this context. Like, do you or did you enjoy math in high school and middle school and like college and whatnot?
Yes. That was actually like, as far as like academic studies go, that was something that Joel and I bonded over, was just the enjoyment of math. We're like the two people in math class that actually enjoy doing it.
Yep.
And it's probably because it's the satisfying thing. Like you have a problem in front of you or an equation in front of you, and you have to figure out how to solve it. And it's the logic and the work your brain goes through to piece everything together to finally get that satisfying conclusion at the end was fulfilling.
Yep.
So in that regard, if you're going to look at economic games from like the same lens, and I don't want to say like economic games, you could play a lot of these economic games and not really focus on math.
Yeah.
As a thing. Like look at Container. Like sure, you're probably like counting your money and you're probably trying to anticipate stuff based off of like how can I make the most money, but there really isn't that much math involved in that game.
No. You're kind of just guesstimating it's more marginal gains.
Yeah, it's gut feeling on what you think people are going to spend money on, or how much you should bid in this auction or whatever.
Yeah. Which I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's an auction. Like you can calculate out like to like the decimal point how much you should technically bid on this, but that doesn't take into account what somebody else is going to bid on it, because maybe it's technically worth more to them, or it's technically worth more to you, but they're going to spend more on it because they don't want you to get it. So now you have to take that into account. And I think auctions kind of break that calculation up to where it's like, you can't just go pure, this is worth $15 to me.
Yeah. So now if you're looking at the pure calculation, like you can look at a game like Vinos, right? You're building your economy of wine, you're selling your wine. But again, on the surface, there isn't really math involved in that game. But you can calculate out, like Joel just said, like you can get a bunch of victory points by doing this action, or I could do this action instead, and it's going to take me maybe this many turns to get this accomplished, and I'll probably get this amount of points out of it. Yeah. So if you're willing to like put the effort and forethought to like look ahead, and this is how much victory points I can get versus this, like you're looking at the return and which one's a better investment of time. Sure. How much math is that? I don't know, but It does have like a similar like satisfying puzzle to it, especially like certain games like Arkwright, which does actually have math in it. Has more of that feeling towards like mathematics. I think the same sort of like logic that your brain is going to have to work in the same way.
It seems like there's a certain level of like guesstimation, basically, which is a word I'm taking from like. Honestly, I think it was in a math book. The word guesstimate, like I think it was in some math or like something in some book in high school where you had to, where it was like, you're not actually trying to get the perfect answer. You are guesstimating.
Sounds like a chemistry term.
It might be. Yeah. It's not an exact word. I don't think it's a word. I think it's something somebody just kind of like made up, but that's kind of how I'm feeling like what you're kind of describing. You're not doing the fine calculations, but you kind of have an idea. And so you're just kind of guesstimating like, I should spend 2 turns on this, or $10 on this, or, you know, whatever. Or like, this is worth, like sidereal confluence. You're trying to balance like the conversion of like small cubes to big cubes, and like and there's all these like little kind of calculations that you're doing, but you're not really doing them. You're just kind of like, I know intrinsically that if I want to get more value, I need 2 cubes from you rather than 1.
Yeah, but they know the same thing. So now you're trying to balance. Now that's not, obviously that's negotiation, but you're still kind of doing that, but it's not really math. No,
you're just kind of doing that in your head, and that's not.
You're considering the value of things.
Yeah, and that's not really a heavy economic game or 18xx game, obviously. But you know there is some math in that where you're trying to. There is kind of math.
You could argue it as a heavy economic game, right? Like there is an economy, there's an in-game economy, and it's driven by the players.
I just don't know how heavy it is. Like it's definitely economic. I just don't know how heavy necessarily.
Yeah, but you have to teach everybody all these different asymmetrical races. Like it's hard. You can play that game once and know what your race is doing and have no clue what everybody else is trying to do.
Yeah, and not even care really.
Yeah, but it does matter because the more you play and the more you know like what each of those different races are doing, the better you're going to play.
Oh, yeah.
So there is so much...
I mean, I was more meaning like at the first time you're playing, you don't really care.
Sure.
Now, it would be good to know because then you know like, oh no, if I give them this, they win the game. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not going to come down to that one small transaction as to why they win the game, but like you kind of know these things. Like you start to know these things once you play it more for sure. But
right.
So, but yeah, I mean, kind of sidestepping with the math. Like, do you think? I mean, we talked about how it didn't feel like a lot of math, but do you think that the math or like the feeling of math turns people off?
You look at a game like Arkwright where people know there's math in it.
Yeah.
Even though there's not that much math, like close to the end, like there's like the AP round where everybody's just trying to figure out like, how do I get the most like bang for my buck with these last few actions I have?
Yeah.
And calculating out the, the appeal track.
Yeah.
You know,
making sure that
simple
you
math,
sell enough,
but it's there. But even just like the thought of like looking at that and people thinking it looks like a spreadsheet or it looks like this math simulation or whatever, it does turn people off.
Yeah.
Honestly, looking at it and having that reaction made me want to play that game where like it turned somebody like Dylan off from wanting to play that game.
Yeah. Yep.
So there is something to be said for it. Like, I don't think I've ever played a board game where I felt like it's just pouring out math equations. It doesn't ever feel like math class.
Yeah.
The closest I would honestly say is Alchemist.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because there is a direct logic puzzle you're doing in that.
It's not traditional arithmetic, but it is a logic puzzle.
No, I mean it is a basic truth table as if you were doing one from or one of the like story problem logic puzzles. those are, I mean, it's basically the same thing.
And I've said to teach alchemist correctly, you have to, teach the worker placement stuff, what's going on the board, like the game portion of it. And then you say, okay, now let's take a step back. Let's have a math lesson. Like, this is how you do the actual deduction and what alchemist is all about.
Yeah.
And you have to teach it from like, it's almost like you have this lesson plan and like, here's an example of the problem. Yeah. Honestly, it would help like having a marker board. Like, it really feels like that. And that's part of the charm that I get from alchemists.
Which, and if somebody knows logic and like knows truth tables and things like that, like they can pick up on it in like half a second. But you do have to have a math lesson. Like, this is how, like, especially if they don't know, this is how, like, logically, if this can't happen, you know that these things can't happen. And like, you have to actually walk through how that works. And it is completely separate from the rest of the game. It really doesn't affect the rest of the game. I mean, you don't need, like, you need to know the logic to play the game and be successful, but they still feel mutually exclusive. I'm sure that there's a way that you could take the logic out of that game and it still be a game. It just wouldn't be as interesting.
Right. But
it would still technically be a game. All of those other facets are in other games. I mean, worker placement and like the publishing theories is obviously a little bit different, but like there are things where it's placing out your marker to gain points. Like that's all it is. So like that game exists, but the logic just takes it a completely different direction.
Right.
So, but we have had cases where that has turned people off too.
Granted, Alchemist isn't a heavy economic game, but it provides like it stimulates your brain in a similar way.
Yeah. So I want to touch on that, or kind of expand on the point you just made. But one thing I want to cover before we jump away from math, do you think you have to be good at math to be good at the game, to be good at any of these games?
No, not at all. You can just learn how to play the game, and as long as you play it enough, like you don't need to understand concepts of math at all. Like you're not applying math. Your brain just works in a similar way. Yeah. So as long as you play a game enough and you understand like the rules and what it is you're trying to do in it, you will slowly start to learn how to play it well.
Yeah.
And as long as
it comes back to that intrinsic value type thing.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like, do you want to put in the effort? Like, do you seek out that brain burn? And if I feel like if you're getting into the heavy end of board gaming, whether it's a heavy economic game or a heavy war game or whatever it is, like you are up for the brain burn.
Yeah. Which kind of takes me to the point I wanted to expand on that you were kind of talking about with Alchemist, where there's a different part to it, and that's the strategy and brain burning part of like heavy economic games and 18XX, and that there is something to them that it has really nothing to do with math under the hood, but like math can play a factor in your brain if you want it to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I think back to Arkwright, where like there was you at one point said that you thought I would almost always win that game between the two of us, because I would always be willing to do the math towards the end of the game after it's been 3 to 4 hours, and like your brain just starts to like really fatigue. I mean, you start to get mental fatigue because you're doing. Yep. I mean, it's a 3 to 4 hour game, and you're really doing the math.
I would say the last like 2 times we played Arkwright, I have like led the game almost the entire time until the very end, and actually like last time I actually did put in the work to figure out what I could get out of it. I just we were between what, 2 points at the end or 1 point at the end? I think it was pretty close.
It was really close. So like,
I feel like I maximized it, but I did have to sit down and like have AP for a couple rounds. Like that'll happen in Arkwright. You'll get to the very end, and if you want to maximize what you're doing and have a chance of winning, you need to sit there and you need to evaluate best course of action, and you can see it in Arkwright. You just have to put in the work. But if you put in the work and figure out like this is the amount of money I need or whatever, to get the to buy back my shares, because you want to buy back all your shares. You got to figure out how to make that happen. You're going to sit there for a round or two, and you're going to figure it out, and you're going to do it. If you're willing to put the work in. But you have to, in that game, you really like at the end, you have to put the work in.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's what the first couple times we'd played it, I had like always been the one putting the work in, and like that's why you made that statement.
Right.
But when we played it more recently,
and those nights, those were like weeknights too.
Yeah.
And like the most recent time we played it, it was a Friday night. Like I had nowhere to be. I wasn't exhausted.
Yep. That's true. Yep. No, and I think we talked about when you had made that statement at one point. Like, I was like, I don't think that's going to be true. But like, I saw your point. It's like, if you're not willing to put in the work, especially if you start to get tired, like, and we talked about how like I get more energy as like the game goes on, like as I'm using my brain more that way. When we were at Ross's the other day, and we were playing the game, and I had brought food.
1844.
Yeah, we were playing 1844, and I had brought food, and I got so engrossed in like teaching and playing the game that like I never ate. I never ate that food. Like, it was a complete waste of money, like absolute waste of money. Which I was a little mad at myself about, but like that's just what happens. Like it's like my brain just gets in a mode of like strategy and thinking that it's just like I don't care about food anymore, and I don't know anthropologically what that is, but like there's something to that, like to that strategy and like or brain burning or whatever. And maybe this is where
well, it's like a way you kind of recharge. Like people recharge in different ways and like escape. I know, like cardboard reality, escape reality,
escape. Xscape.
18Xscape reality. But
that sounds like that should be a game. Anyway,
but yeah, I feel like people like recharge differently, and like me and you, we like to recharge by like burning our brain in a way that it is satisfying. It's fulfilling to us. But like other people, like my wife, she could get back from a long day of work, and like the last thing she wants to do is sit down and play a game that makes her brain burn.
For sure.
She wants to watch TV and relax or read a book.
Yeah. Talking on that, Nick, we've kind of had the conversation before where you kind of like games where you outwit your opponent. Do you think that kind of plays into the heavy economic games where you're like outwitting them from a like strategy math way? Like, or
I feel like that's less of it. I think because it especially depends on the game you're talking about.
Yeah.
You could talk about like, even though this isn't heavy, but it is like economic, like Container or something like that, where I feel like there might be a little bit of outwitting there,
where you're kind of like baiting them to spend more than they should.
Yeah, or like Indonesia maybe, where there's a bit more like player interaction. But if you look at something like Arkwright, where there's less player interaction, or like a Vinos, or like any sort of like Lacerda tile, like those are more to a degree multiplayer solitaire. There is definitely some interaction going in Arkwright, but it's all about pulling your personal levers the best you can to try to get as much out of it as you can. But it's not, there's enough going on that you're so focused in your own little puzzle that you're not necessarily like, you are sort of paying attention to what, like I'm kind of paying attention to what Joel's doing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be like it versus a game like Go, where it's like clearly I'm involved and I'm just as invested in what Joel's doing as what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's more, these games are more strategic typically, not always.
Yeah.
But typically they are more strategic than they are tactical. So I don't know if it's like a battle of wits as it is a battle of just optimizing the best. Like sometimes it's all about optimization. But then in 1844, it kind of feels like a little bit like optimization. Yeah. Personal optimization, which is like an operational 18XX. Yeah, but then you look at like 1849, and there's definitely some like personal optimization stuff going on there. But I think a lot of it is also like, it's easier to manipulate like what's going on in the stock market to negatively impact somebody else's game to benefit you personally.
That's true. And that does kind of explain why like you like those more. Yeah. I like the operational more, like just the way that interaction kind of goes. Like you're more of the like outwitting, outsmarting in that regard, where it's like, I saw this, like me selling the stock, like I saw that this was going to affect you like more negatively, and seeing those connections definitely seems to be your like cup of tea kind of. Whereas I kind of want to build and do my own thing almost. Like I do want to benefit off other people and like use their stuff, but it's more like,
you want to have a little interaction, but you do like the multiplayer solitaire.
Yeah.
Like you like the interaction in Arkwright with the appeal track where you're competing on trying to have the best appeal so you can sell the most goods. Yeah. But if somebody was coming in and like somehow closing your factory, you wouldn't be as into it.
No, I don't. I think it's probably some sort of like control freak problem, I'm sure. But yeah, it's like I feel like in that case I'd feel I'm out of control of that. And I think that's why the randomness in games affects me a lot. Because I'm out of control of that.
Now that affects me when it's something like you do something immediately and then somebody can immediately tear it down.
Yeah.
Like if I had it,
just a back and forth of like, why would I do anything? When
like if you're playing
immediately stop
you're
it.
playing the cats en route, you put your cats out, or you do whatever, or like you build something and then it's somebody before it gets back to you, before you can actually utilize whatever it is you just did, it got torn down.
Yeah.
Like that will grate on me. Like I don't like that.
Yeah, that's true.
But
that's a good point. So you mentioned at the beginning that you had a thought when I kind of proposed this topic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what that is.
So when I was trying to, basically when you posed this topic, I kind of looked at like, all right, what heavy economic games stand out to me as my favorites, right?
Yeah.
And I considered things like 18XX, Food Chain Magnate, Arkwright.
Yeah.
And then I considered some other, like what I would consider heavy economic games. Like I think I've mentioned Vinos already a lot on the show.
Like Vital Lacerda games.
So yeah, Vital Lacerda games, you can make an argument that those are heavy economic, especially something like Vinos where you are producing wine and investing in wine to then sell wine or, display it at a fair to make, to profit off of it.
Yeah.
What makes those games I said, like Food Chain Magnate, like let's just compare that one. So Food Chain Magnate versus Vinos. Like what is it about Food Chain that I prefer over something like Vinos?
Yeah.
And it's
both heavy economic games.
Both heavy economic games. Both make your brain burn in a similar way, right? It's the abstraction of what it is you're doing in Vinos that I don't like as much as
Food Chain. It feels very direct.
Food Chain, you are making money and you are getting money and you are spending money and it's all about money. Yeah. And when you're talking about an economic game, what should economic games be focused on? It should be focused on profit.
Yeah.
And Vinos is focused on profit, but they abstract it. It's like, I think it's awful that you put a victory point track around this thing. And that's like kind of, I think a big reason why I'm kind of falling out of love with the traditional Euro game.
Yeah.
Because like the victory point track is uninspired. It's something that a lot of games just tack on because it's an easy way to determine the victor. I think if you take the victory point track out, it makes you really relook at the way you're trying to design the game. And
even as a player, it makes you like have to change the way you're thinking about it. Instead of who can score the most victory points, it's like you have to really like. I think of other games where an example everybody knows, like Settlers of Catan, first to 10 points. Those are victory points, but like it's not like who has the highest. Mm-hmm. It is like once you hit this, the game is over.
Right.
And there are much better examples that are like not necessarily like victory points where it's like first to 3 things and you're like, yeah, sure, that's victory points, but it's like it's not, because it's not like, and I'm not saying that like all victory point games are like point salad games where it's just like who can score the most with a crazy ton of like that's not at all what I mean. It's more like, instead of just like who can optimize the best to score the most points, it's who can optimize the best in the fastest way possible to score points or to like meet this goal. And I think that kind of that separates things, and that makes you have to think about the game differently when it's not scoring the most points. You have to like score it quickly.
Sure. Well, that makes it like a race game.
Yeah, almost.
Istanbul kind of has that where you're collecting rubies.
Yeah, that's a good example. It's like
which you could just say those are victory points.
But it does feel different. You do. I feel like you think about the game differently when it's something like
more
that.
of a race. It's fun, but it's still abstract. Like when you're like we're talking heavy economic games.
Yeah.
All of the heavy economic games that I've been wanting to get to table recently all involve making money or investing in stocks which are just as good as money. Like that is money.
Yeah.
It's just not liquid.
Yeah. I guess that
like Arkwright has that, Food Chain has that, Container has that, 18XX has that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think I mentioned earlier that I was curious if that would be exactly my like what explains it in my head, that this feeling I couldn't really put into words. I think it does, but in kind of a different way that I'm thinking about it, in that victory points, you're right, it is so abstracted because it's like these victory points don't mean anything, where you're not doing anything with them except scoring them. Whereas with the economic games you're talking about, with it where it's all money, you're getting this money and then it's like, do I spend this now
or
to
continue
do something,
to invest
or continue to invest it, or do I like hold the money and hope that like this money is worth more
personally
than it is if I had invested
it. the money in those games that you're earning, like let's just take
are basically victory points.
Yeah, let's take 18XX as an example, right?
Yeah.
Your own personal supply of money, that is your victory points.
Yeah.
And you get to do something so cool with those victory points. You, like you said, you get to invest those back into the game to try to get a bigger return later.
Yeah.
Where like if you're playing Vinos and you get victory points, you don't get to spend those to invest in higher returns.
And if you do, it's like,
you
spend one to do this one little tiny thing. It's not, it's not an investment.
But it's so abstracted.
It's so abstracted. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a really excellent point. So I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, like you're right. Yeah, so, I think that's my problem too, because I've kind of, maybe a little bit dragging behind you, but I've kind of been falling out of like the traditional Euros as well, and just leaning a lot more towards Splotter and a lot more towards 18XX and things like that. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just how the money like has a value now and later. It's which is better, spending it now for the hopes of more points later, basically investing it, or holding on to it and hoping that it's worth more. Than like hoping that other people's investments go south type thing almost.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's like the way you approach the question, you pose like, why do we love heavy economic games?
Yeah.
I added on, why do I love heavy economic games more than other heavy Euros? Yeah. And like, that's the answer I come to.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at it from just the way you pose the question, you seek the brain burning puzzle that you would get from something like math or coding. Like your brain works in a similar way, even though you're not doing those things, you're doing something else. It works in the same way. And that's why you like those kinds of games over a war game where your brain is going to think differently.
That's true. Your brain thinks more tactically.
Yes.
And whatnot. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So one last question before we move on to a segment I'm calling What's on My Mind. Do you think there's like one mechanic to rule them all, like, or do you think that's it? That it is just like the money, like it is the fact that like the money is the winning. Do you think like that's the like, because with 18XX there's like route building and stock holding. There's like all these other things, and in other heavy economic games there's also like worker placement in there and all of that. Like, do you think it is like a lot of it is just the money, or is it just like the overall feeling?
I don't think it's one mechanic to rule them all. I think it's a blend of a few things that you mix together in the right quantities and you get something great out of it. I think it's the money. Don't abstract it with victory points.
Yeah.
And be able to do cool things with that money, invest, get return, a better return on your money later. I think it's having some level of interactivity amongst players that is interesting. And I think it is providing a deep enough decision space on either like planning some sort of like strategy ahead and trying to like fulfill that, something that is satisfyingly, like there needs to be a satisfying action or something that you're taking throughout the game that you look forward to and are wanting to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I think you blend those things together and I think you have a good heavy economic game.
Okay. I think that makes sense.
I don't know if you had any input on that. But...
No, I mean, I was trying to decide if there was like that, like one mechanic, like, and maybe the money I think has part of way to do with it, or has partially to do with it. But I think it's more of the way that you intrinsically then have to like deal with the money and like how you use it, kind of how we've been talking, where it's like you are using it. You basically like you have this resource. It's how do you spend this more efficiently than everyone else? Like, there is probably some way that you say, I'm not going to spend any money in this game, and you win. Mm-hmm. Very, very unlikely. But like, I mean, you think about like, even though this isn't a heavy economic game, it's like the estates. You can embezzle money every round and basically like not spend money. And you can win the game even though you basically spent no money if you just embezzled. Now, is that the best strategy? I don't know. It kind of depends on the game. And that's the same way. It's like, how much do you invest in 18XX? Like, especially if somebody like does all these crazy things and then goes bankrupt, well, you beat them because they're broke. Mm-hmm. And did you spend more money than everybody else? If you spent more money than everybody else and then didn't get a good investment out of it because them going bankrupt like killed a company's value or something, and now whatever you bought it for is now worth less. So what, less than if you wouldn't have spent the money?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's definitely that balance there, and I think that maybe that the money, I'm kind of coming to this conclusion as you kind of brought it up, that the money, just the way that you have to treat it in the heavy economic games is almost like, I get that it describes heavy economic, like obviously economic money, like I mean that, like obviously like that's money and math is basically
but
all,
it's obvious like when you sit down and you really look at it, right? Like the games that you've loved recently,
it's like that is like the one mechanic is like
it's
not
just
money.
Because you want to bring pretty poker chips to the table.
No, I mean that's part of it. Let's be honest.
You're handling
that is
money.
Part of it. That's part of it, honestly. Like let's really be honest here. If you're not playing with poker chips, it's like, what are you doing? But yeah, no, I think you hit a really good point that I had considered.
Well, there you
Sweet. Go. Awesome. Cool. So now we're going to jump to a segment that I'm calling What's on My Mind. We kind of talked about it the last episode. It was kind of like maybe going to be like a self-help thing, but it is more like what's on my mind. A lot of the times those things are like self-helpy type stuff, but like this week it's not really that, so I think it's more of a what's on my mind. It kind of defines it more. It's very like a boring name, but like that is what it is. And this is my show, so I get to call it what I want. So I had two topics, but decided on one. And so it's something I've really been thinking about, particularly in regards to the podcast, but also I've been kind of like having a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit, we'll say, and kind of like thinking about like starting my own business in some way, and trying to figure out what that business would be and how I would run it. And I've been trying to find a way, because something that I've just been feeling a lot recently is like this like bombardment of advertising that we have. And is there a way to run a business without advertising? And so that's kind of the premise of this discussion. Because I don't like the bombardment of advertising that you have. I mean, like the way that we're like marketing products and spending all this like crazy amounts of money just to like put like your product and your service and your whatever in front of people's eyes. I mean, like think about if you go through one day and like how many ads you see. You probably can't count, because you just become so oblivious to them. Like they're just like part of your everyday like routine, that like you don't realize that you probably see like 100 ads in a day. I heard a statistic at one point. I don't remember what it was, but like it was a ridiculous number, and you're like, how could I see that many ads in one day? And obviously it varies based on your routine, but it's like there's no way. But if you look at like, especially if you get on like social media and stuff, like I mean, like every third post,
cable television,
or you have cable television,
commercial breaks.
Yeah, it's like every third thing is an advertisement, and it's like, how is this, like, you know, and I'm not saying like, oh, back in the day, like I'm a young person, like obviously that's not really a thing. Like advertising's always been a thing when I've been alive, but you know, is that the way that it should be? Like
it is the thing when you talk about cable television. Back in the day, when right. I had cable television.
That is true, yeah, with Netflix and everything and Hulu and all that. Although some of those still have ads, which is insane, because you pay
if you do the cheap Hulu, yeah.
Yeah. So, but no. So, I just kind of want to talk about it, like especially when I think about it. I mean, like obviously we haven't done ads on the podcast yet, and I honestly don't ever want to. But I know that like at some point, if we want this to get bigger, there may be the need for that. But I'm kind of really wanting to dance around the idea of not doing it, because I know, I mean, some of my favorite creators, like content creators online that I follow, don't, and they do it full time. Like The Minimalist and Matt Diavella are two creators. I get that that's two, but I know that there's more. But there's two that are just through Patreon, and other things, but they only talk about stuff that like they personally support, and it's not paid for. And I've kind of had this idea in the back of my mind that I don't really want to do that with the podcast. And I'm curious what you think as basically the other founding host
for the podcast
in regards to that. Well, particularly with the podcast, but also just like from a business point of view. I mean, you know, we've talked about business stuff before, but I don't know.
I mean, from a business point of view, you're starting a business. Do you need to advertise? I would say a resounding yes, you have to advertise.
Yeah.
Can you do it in a way where you're not like shoving it down people's throats? Maybe. But
that's what I want to avoid.
Advertisement's key. You just don't want to come off like super salesy, I guess. But Cardboard Reality would still have almost no listeners if we hadn't, posted to Reddit. Like that is as good as advertising, right? That's us self-promoting.
Yes.
And I'm sure a bunch of you that are listening right now have watched or have started listening to us over the past couple of years because you found us on Reddit after we self-promoted.
Yeah. Well, I'm also kind of thinking about like with that, running businesses without needing to like advertise other people's products for like people to pay you to like, what if you make like, I don't know, shirts or something like, and like selling like almost like namespace type stuff or like billboard, like, there's other things like that. Like, I mean, like for a podcast business, like being able to like other people can advertise for like airspace on our podcast. And so like being able to run a business without us doing that is part of the question, I guess, as well.
So what kind of advertisements are you for versus against? Like you're for people wearing a shirt that has your branding on it.
Yes.
But you don't.
No, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I guess I should back up. This question was definitely more of the like us advertising like other people and they pay us.
Okay.
Yeah, like they pay us to advertise for them because we have an audience type thing. That's kind of more what I meant. But like I have been thinking about like
Capstone gives us money for us to talk about Capstone.
Yeah, exactly. Like not basically being able to not have to do that, but still this be a business that somehow supports.
I think it's a cool
two of us or whatever.
I think it's a cool idea. But you also have to consider like we're in a very niche hobby, and we are in a very niche side of that hobby, talking about games that most people don't have on their radar.
It's true.
One ad, like at the maybe closer to the top of the show, where it's 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It's pretty easy to fast forward through it.
Sure.
Now the ads where you can't fast forward through them, you got to sit through this commercial ad, this 80-second whatever. Those are annoying, but I get it. Like people need to make a living, and if I like what it is that they're doing and they can get by because of that ad, I'm good with it.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess like taking this to like the Patreon level, then like, would you rather just support them with however much you want to support them rather than watch the ad?
Personally,
yes.
If you're talking about me from like a viewer point of view, which is the question you're asking, I would rather them make money off of the ad versus me have another subscription.
Okay.
That's kind of the way I would take it. And like I've listened to Sam Harris's like Waking Up podcast, which I think he's recently renamed. He used to have a Patreon, and he actually tore the Patreon down because he's making enough money from like ads and stuff. Oh. And I don't think his ads are very like intrusive in the show. And like once he gets into the discussion, he doesn't, like he talks at the top of the show about what the show's going to be about. He does an ad, and then he gets into the show, and then there's no more interruption. So you still have the integrity of the podcast there. You're not being like constantly interrupted. Like if you watch like something on cable TV, you're going to get 3 or 4 commercial breaks in an hour-long television show. That breaks up the integrity of the show, and it kind of ruins the feel of it. Like think about watching Game of Thrones, and then in the middle of it like stop, and it advertises McDonald's,
Kleenex,
and then Cialis. Like I didn't,
it has to be Cialis.
Yeah, that totally ruins. They're like sitting on bathtubs on the beach. Okay, thanks. Oh, back to Game of Thrones. Great.
Yep, bathtubs on the beach to dark like battle scene like that.
So I think it's cool, honestly. Which I probably have a different outlook on this than you do, but I think it's awesome that Sam Harris like was able to do that for the people that really care about a show. Like, thank you so much for supporting me through Patreon, but I no longer want you to feel obligated to support me. Like, I'm taking this down. Yeah. I'm making the money I need to make elsewhere. Yeah. Just listen to my show and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I could see that too. I struggle with the advertising, like we all know that there's toxic advertising out there, and I feel like that there's a lot of ways that like advertising in certain ways like contributes to like just different societal problems, whether that's like materialism or any of the like
absolutely
other like major like social issues.
Marketing is like a manipulative thing.
Yeah, and so like, I guess that's what I always want to avoid. And I get that you can be picky about like who you decide to advertise on like your show or business or whatever, but that's something that
taking that approach, like, yes, I advertise something that I don't 100% believe in?
Yeah.
No. You're not going to hear me talk about Blue Apron, like I'm a vegan, right? Like I'm not going to advertise Blue Apron if it was just my podcast, like no one else is on it, right? I'm not going to be advertising Blue Apron, who like I don't think currently have like vegan options you can get as a meal plan.
I think you can get some vegetarian ones, but that's
they're not vegan. Yeah,
exactly.
So like that wouldn't be something, that's not a product I believe in, so I'm not going to like advertise it for everybody else, even if they're going to give me money for it.
Yeah.
Or take a publisher, I won't name any names, but let's take a game publisher where they maybe have like one game out that I think's okay, but I don't really like their type of game.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have them sponsor, they're not going to be a sponsor of the show.
Yeah. That's fair.
But, if something came along like Capstone Games where like, half of the podcast really enjoy what the products they put out and we believe in them, I don't have a problem with sponsoring them or having them sponsor us. Is that how you say that? We're not sponsoring them, they're sponsoring us.
Yeah. It's a little weird. Yeah. They pay us to talk about them.
Yes, that
or at least talk about their games. Yeah.
But with that said, like if I were to be in a situation where I needed to review one of their games and I didn't like it, I'll be honest.
How do you separate?
I'll be honest about it. But then you do get in a gray area where people are always going to say like, "Oh, do you hear that? They reviewed Arkwright, but like Capstone, is their sponsor. Like of course they're going to say it's great."
Arkwright for the past like,
but Arkwright's also a great game. Like there's a reason Capstone, not that they're sponsoring the show or anything, but if they were, like, there's a reason that we would maybe be open to that idea because we are passionate about what it is they're doing,
and we've gotten to know.
Or GMT Games, and there are games from GMT Games, like, and they have a huge library. There's games from them that I don't like, but there are games from them that I think are fantastic. I love what they're doing, and
and I think I guess probably the best way for like people to know that whether or not their critics are being biased is like, if we talk about a game we like, do we continue to talk about it? If we say like, oh, this is a great game and never talk about it again, do we really think it's a great game, or were we paid to say that it was a great game? Like, I think that because just to take your Arkwright example, like it's a great game. Like, you've heard us talk about, like, we reviewed it and we've talked about it for the past like 2 years since we played it. If we had been sponsored for that first thing, like, and we were continuing to talk about it, I don't think that you could say that we were paid to do so unless it's all we talked about.
You have to look
but even then, it's like, if we still continue to talk about something and continue to play it and learn more from it, like, is it still a great game? Even like, you
have to look at that type of content creator. Like, some content creators are going to play a game and move on to the next thing because their audience needs like the new hotness or whatever. And I have not gone out of my way to avoid new hotness. We used to like cover it quite a bit, and occasionally we still do. But it's just, I'm going to cover what it is I'm interested in, and I'm not that concerned to make sure I have like a brand new game to discuss every episode. It's going to be whatever it is I'm into in the moment, and whatever I played recently that I feel like I have something valuable to say on air. I will talk about. And that's like kind of the way I'm sort of approaching
kind of
like so like our podcast, we will continue to talk about games we really enjoy. Like Arkwright or Whitehall or Alchemist. Like, you've heard us mention these games episode after episode.
And 18XX games. Hint, hint. 18Xonomics.
But there are podcasts that'll just move on to the next thing because that's just the nature of the way they're structured. But you would think occasionally you would hear about the games that they really love more than once.
And occasionally you do. Just, it doesn't feel like frequently enough, really. I think that there's definitely that, like, just like thinking about like that, like advertising things. It's like, if you're good, people will follow. Like, you don't, like, word of mouth is like an amazing thing, and it's free.
Too bad we're shit.
Well, darn. If you're listening to us, sorry, we're shit. But no, like there is that thing. Like, if you're good, like, people will like stick around. Like, people will
build it, they will come.
Basically, I mean, that's what it is. And there's definitely something to be said for like word of mouth advertising and the fact that it's free. Like,
sure. No, I
word
think
of mouth
it's one of the most powerful ways.
Absolutely nothing.
But you have to have a damn good product for that to be effective.
Yeah. And that's why you advertise on podcasts and whatnot. Yeah. And I don't know. There's just, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like, if we're good enough, and yeah, I don't know. It's hard to put into words. It's like there's just this there's this vision in my head of like what I wish could be true about the world, and I don't currently see a path like from where we are to there. It's just weird. Like, it's kind of like idealism and optimism, but it's like, yeah, like
you're very passionate about this advertising thing.
Well, no, it's just kind of like something that's been kind of, I don't know, in my head. Like, we just get, because I do feel like it is ingrained in our society so deeply now, and I do think that in a lot of ways it does like persuade.
We're a materialistic.
Yeah, and I think it does like sway the like flow of society in lots of weird ways.
The fear of missing out is a real thing.
Fear of missing out's a real thing. Like, somehow like talking about like toxic advertising, like the way that you like bringing like making someone sad or angry or like
emotionally charged
in a negative way often makes them buy something to feel better. And it's like that's one of the big things that I would like want to avoid as either as a business owner who is paying for advertising and doing advertising, or as someone who is like doing it like as someone who like runs a podcast, like running an ad for someone, like being on both ends of that. Like that's something that I would want to be like very conscious of. I don't know, whatever word it is. In my head, it just like didn't work. But that's something I'd want to be very aware of, and make sure that I'm not contributing to that negatively. So that's where this has kind of been.
Yeah, no, I think like,
I've been thinking about it a lot.
I'm proud of like Cardboard Reality, and like that's the thing in my life that I would want to advertise, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I want to maintain a level of integrity for the show,
for sure,
if we were to advertise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that we're absolutely not in the talks with anyone at all to do this.
Nope.
But
one, we're not big enough. Two, we just haven't talked to anybody. Sure. Nobody's talked to us, so
Yeah.
The closest thing we get is review copies of games.
Yep. And we usually have to seek those out.
And we usually do seek those out, but occasionally somebody does reach out. And sometimes we say yes, sometimes we say no.
I have come to the conclusion that I hate review copies of games because it makes you feel like that's the only thing you can play until you put a review out on it. And like if it's gone, like life gets busy, and if it's been like 2 months since you've gotten that copy and it's just sitting on your shelf, you feel terrible that you haven't put out a review copy or a review of it.
Yeah.
And we've
had
very little review copies on our show. And at this point, like I'm not asking for them. Like I don't like them.
No, unless it's one that you specifically know. But even in that case, like my problem with getting review copies of stuff is
you want to support them, so shouldn't you just bought it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I also get, because I've talked to Clay about this, is like if
it's a two-way street.
It's like if him giving us a review copy sells one game for him, he's made his money back.
Yeah, because the margin on board games is so low.
Well,
or so high. Like the margin's high.
Well, there's that, but also it's like he gave us a copy and he sold one copy. Like, I mean, it's basically a wash. He sells 2 copies. He's now made his money. He's now like, he's now making money. And anything more than that is just a ton. Is just astronomically, like the percentage of it. Like, say a game is $30. It costs $10 to produce. You give away 1 copy. All right, so you're out $20. Or you're out like you're out $10 basically, right? You sell one game, you already doubled your money. Yeah. Now I don't know if that's the margins on board games. I
think it's better.
It may be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also a lot of things that go into that. I mean, there's shipping, there's
storing a warehouse.
Yeah, there's lots of other things that's like the cost of production isn't necessarily the full cost of it. So like there's other things,
right? Because you've already paid for the art, and you've yeah.
But you sell 2 copies, like you've basically made your money back.
Sure,
at least he seemed to make it sound like one copy would generally make, like, not necessarily make the money back, but at least like makes it worth it, because it's like you gave away a copy and you sold a copy, so it's like 1-to-1, and then anything beyond that is better. So
yep.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing with review copies. But this has gone off on a tangent, so as this show is going to be prone to do. So some of this might be cut. You won't hear any of it, but
or you may hear all of it, including my piss.
Not that we're probably not doing that part. I picked up the camera and like walked up to the bathroom while weird. You were in there. Yeah, it was a little weird, but no, I actually didn't do that. That's we're weird people. We're not that weird. All right. Well, this has been 18Xonomics episode 2. Any final thoughts on anything we talked about?
Give me more money and throw away your stupid victory point track.
Yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. So remember to keep cardboard gaming a reality in your life.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.